Now, granted, the Kraken probably will be trying out a number of things early on to see what sticks, but with training camp starting up, we may have gotten an early look at who they're looking at for some of those top 6 forward roles. What's cracking, everybody? I'm Scott, and once again we are back with some more Seattle Kraken news, and we're gonna jump right into training camp, which kicked off on Thursday of this week. And through being a part of the Depths membership club, myself and a couple of hundred others were lucky enough to get tickets to the first ever Seattle Kraken practice as a part of this first ever training camp. And, well, normally this might not always be the most exciting thing that goes on in hockey. For a new franchise with a bunch of guys coming together for the first time, it did give us a chance to get our first look at some potential lines that this team might be looking at putting together and putting out on the ice when things get started in the middle of October. Now, yes, again, granted, the Kraken are likely to be trying out a number of different line combinations throughout the rest of this training camp, preseason, and even early on in the regular season before something hopefully does eventually stick. And also there's the fact that Yanni Gourde will not be starting the season with the Kraken and will be coming back from his shoulder injury at some point, hopefully by the end of the year. And don't worry, by that I do mean the end of the calendar year, not the end of the regular season. He was originally just slated to miss probably somewhere around 2 months, which would have him back sometime in mid-December. But we heard recently from Ron Francis that it sounds like he might be even coming back a little bit sooner depending on how the rest of his rehab goes, but he does look a little bit ahead of schedule and potentially even coming back by the end of November. Either way though, obviously his absence for the first month or 2 of the season does leave a clear gap in that top 6 that will have to be filled, even on top of the other shuffling that will be going on as they do try to find lines that work in that top 6. And as far as that's concerned, for what it's worth, in the first session of the first training camp, there was one trio that seemed to be sticking together throughout most of the drills. That being Eberle, Schwartz, and McCann at center. Now, with the forward group that the Kraken do have, Eberle and Schwartz do make sense as the top line wingers, but I think most people with the absence of Gourde were kind of expecting to see Wennberg get the first look at the center role there over McCann. That having been said, it's not a huge surprise to have McCann there, and I would expect to see both of those guys get a shot on the first line with Gourde out. Plus, it is also worth mentioning that they did have the players split up into a couple of groups, only one of which was on the ice for that first session, which didn't include guys like Wennberg, Tanev, Järnkrok, or Marcus Johansson, so there definitely are some more guys that we didn't even get a chance to see in that first session, and that some of you may have already seen now in following sessions that do figure to mix into this top 6 at some point. And while we're on the subject of forward lines, again, with a number of the notable forwards missing from that first session that I got a chance to see, there was one other line that was worth keeping an eye on, and that was the line of Donskoy, Geekie, and then either Donato or Appleton. And Donato did seem to be getting more of the time with Geekie and Donskoy, but especially with those two guys, I would expect to see more of Appleton in a game setting. Obviously, again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, there is going to be a whole lot of mixing and matching over the next couple of months for the Kraken and their forward group particularly. Appleton, again, is another guy that I certainly have my eye on as one of the guys that could definitely have a pretty big season compared to what he's been able to do to this point in his career with an expanded role now on the Kraken as opposed to what he had in Winnipeg. Meanwhile, at least to me, the fact that he was skating with Donskoy for so much of the time does point to the fact that it seems like the Kraken are going to be giving Morgan Geekie a pretty strong look here, at least in the early going. Which I have to say, from what little we saw in that less than an hour session, he did look pretty impressive, so hopefully that does pan out as he is one of the younger forwards that definitely has a chance to step up here in Seattle. On the other side, when it comes to the defensemen, again with some notables missing, this time in Larson, Dunn, and Soucy, there were a couple of pairings that seemed to be getting pretty strong looks. One being what seems to be the obvious first pairing of defensemen with Mark Giordano and Jamie Oleksiak. The two of whom pretty much spent the entire time together, so I think it's pretty safe to say that this is clearly who the Kraken are looking at being their top pair. And on that subject with those two, for those of you who might be hoping to see a C on one of the jerseys of the Kraken and them having a captain in the first season, it also might be worth mentioning that when it came to who was first on the ice, the only player that beat Donskoy to the ice was Giordano, as he was the first one to officially hit the ice in an official capacity for the Kraken as a part of that first practice. So, as he's already a guy that a lot of people have been looking at as a leader in the clubhouse for this team, again, it's just another sign that if they were to go for a captain in the first season, which personally I think is kind of unlikely, it probably will still be him. But to get back to the defenseman and who we saw spending a fair amount of time together, at least in that first session, we did also get a pretty good look at the pairing of Lauzon and Borgen. Now, this would, to me, seem pretty obviously to be a third pairing type of defenseman look, especially with Larson and Dunn still missing from that particular group. But again, I think this is one where they're going to be trying all sorts of things lower down in the defensive pairings, especially with the surplus of NHL-ready defensemen, and with the expectation that, at least I have, that at least one of Lauzon or Susie will likely end up being traded before the start of the season. And as far as goaltenders go, at least those of us at the first session got a look at Decord and Grubauer. And Decord did look pretty good, outside of still having black and red pads from the Ottawa days, which I guess will match the colors of the Charlotte Checkers, where he's likely to spend most of the season. But still, otherwise he looked pretty good, though he was mostly facing a lot of the lower line and lower pairing guys, as well as a lot of the guys that were there for tryouts that aren't even necessarily signed to the team right now. Meanwhile, Grubauer was definitely facing more from that first look first line, as well as that top defensive pairing, where let's just say there was probably some rust that he was knocking off, as a few did definitely get past him. But again, it's still early on, and I'm sure they're not going full out at this point, but for what it's worth, there it is. Outside of all of that, having a chance to be at this first training camp was honestly just a really awesome experience. Having that first chance to be there live in person, seeing Kraken players on ice for the first time in official capacity. Plus, again, I got to see a few of you guys there and would love to hear any of your thoughts down in the comment section if you did get a chance to get to one of these training camp sessions so far, even if it wasn't the first one. And actually, especially if you weren't at that first one and had a chance to go to one of the other sessions or one of the other days of training camp and got maybe a different look at some other lines or pairings that they were trying out, I'd love to hear about that again down in the comments. Moving on from training camp though, we're not done just yet, as there still are some other pieces of Kraken news that I didn't get a chance to get to in the last What's Kraken episode, or to be bluntly honest, just forgot about with the other stuff going on, but either way, we'll get to it now. The first of which being the announcement of a deal between Root Sports and Fubo TV. And if you're not familiar with Fubo TV, I can't blame you too much. It is yet another streaming service on top of all the other streaming services that have been cropping up over the last few years, so it definitely can be hard to keep track of all of them. Now, if you already have cable and you have Root Sports there, you can skip this part. There's really no point in you thinking about getting Fubo TV. This is pretty much just for those of us who aren't going the cable option and are looking for a way to stream Kraken games. And even for those of us that are in that camp, this wasn't necessarily the most exciting announcement, even though it is Root Sports on a streaming option that you don't have to have cable for, but still, it isn't necessarily an option that a lot of us already have, unlike maybe YouTube TV or Hulu. And on top of that, Fubo isn't necessarily a cheap option either, as their cheapest deal still costs you $65 a month. Plus, it doesn't even get you all of their channels. There still is a small handful of channels that they save for their Fubo Extra package. Now, at this exact moment, we don't know exactly where Root Sports is going to fall in, as it hasn't been officially added to their lineup. So it could be a part of the deal that you would get with that starter package, but there's still a chance that it could end up being in that Fubo Extra package, which would cost you another $8 a month on top of the $65 you're already paying. Though if I had to bet on it, I would actually probably expect that Root Sports would end up falling into that Fubo Extra package, because the other types of networks that are already there, include the NHL network, which will be turning into ESPN Plus or becoming a part of ESPN Plus, but also the MLB network, the Pac-12 network, the SEC network, a lot of these other smaller, more regional type of networks, as well as ones that you would already have to pay for otherwise. So ultimately, unless you already have Fubo for another reason, this probably isn't the option that most people are looking for, as if you were getting it just to be able to watch the Kraken, you could end up paying somewhere around $75 a month just to be able to do so. Now, that is still probably cheaper than what you would be able to get them on cable, especially considering you would still have to get a package with cable that you can watch Root Sports on, but still, it's definitely not what people were hoping for. Now, all hope is not lost, as Root Sports did say that this won't be the only streaming network, or probably won't be the only streaming network that they make a deal with, as they have been actively working with other major streaming services to try and get deals done. It just so happened that Fubo was the first one they were ready to announce. Now, there hasn't been any announcement of what those other streaming networks could be, but personally, I'm definitely hoping for YouTube TV, as that's the one that I already have. But I would expect, even if YouTube TV doesn't end up being one of them, that Hulu probably would be a pretty good bet, as they already are going to be carrying NHL games this next season as a part of the ESPN deal. But still, with nothing else announced at this point and less than 3 weeks till the start of the regular season, I don't know that I would bet on another streaming service being up and running with Root Sports before the Kraken hit the ice at the start of the regular season. And certainly not before the preseason. The other piece of TV-related news around the Kraken that has come out recently is the fact that they are going to be one of a pretty small number of teams that will be given the maximum of 13 nationally broadcast games. Now, it is worth mentioning that 7 of those 13 games, at least at the moment, are only listed as being available on ESPN Plus and Hulu, so not necessarily a cable service, but still the fact that they're listed as national broadcasts would to me indicate the fact that if you already have ESPN Plus, where all games on the NHL network would be anyway, these ones at least won't be subject to the regional blackouts. Outside of those 7, 5 more of the 13 will be on TNT, and the final one, which is the first game at Vegas on October 12th, will be on ESPN. Finally though, before we close things out, there is one more piece of Kraken-related news that is actually new as of the last episode that is pretty cool and I thought would be worth throwing in here. And that is the fact that the Kraken jersey sales, which we talked about last time, went very, very well, as probably a lot of us expected they would. But more than that, it went so well that Kraken jerseys have been the top selling jerseys in all 4 professional sports over the last week. Now, obviously it's a new team and there's a lot of excitement and all that, so that definitely plays a role in it. But they also sold more jerseys in the first day than Vegas sold in their first 2 weeks. So there's definitely something to be said about the fervor and excitement around the Kraken and people wanting to get their hands on these really nice looking jerseys. But with that said, that will bring us to the end of this one. So if you have made it to this point, as always, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that I would appreciate you using. If you think I missed anything or you have any questions about anything talked about here, please do feel free to leave that down in the comment section and I'll be sure to get to it. Otherwise, until next time, stay safe out there and go Kraken.